One, two, three.
Welcome back to our final panel of day one at the 2020 Online EV Summit, the first of 2 days of collaboration and insight from the world's e-mobility leaders. I'm personally hugely pleased to be moderating here today. Our final panel and a hugely significant subject as e-mobility transitions from the margins to the mainstream is a sustainability panel. The industry is coming under greater scrutiny as EVs become even more and more popular, and delivering on our promise of decarbonization as well as clean air is crucial. I would first like to welcome to our digital stage our opening panel keynote, Philip Bellarino, Senior Director or Senior Manager of Electric Vehicles at EDF. I gave you a promotion. Huge thanks to EDF for sponsoring this important panel. And as ever, pleased to do so much to, as ever, please continue to submit your chat questions into the chat. Thank you, Philip. I very much look forward to hearing EDF's take on sustainability in the e-mobility sector.
Thanks very much, Shelley, and thank you for the promotion, and good afternoon all. It's a great pleasure to represent EDF on this panel and to be able to share some thoughts and views on what is a vitally important topic for individuals, businesses, society, and indeed the planet, if we want to go there. So the question set for discussion is, with the battle for electrification won, is the battle for sustainability now the key territory for engagement? Now, please allow me to start with a brief introduction to EDF, if I may. So EDF, we have 13,000 employees in the UK. We're the largest producer of zero carbon electricity, meeting a fifth of the UK's demand. Our company purpose is to help Britain achieve net zero. And we recently launched our Green Recovery Plan, which will enable 50 billion of investment in low carbon tech in the UK by 2035. So this will support continued investment in renewables and zero carbon nuclear power through offshore wind projects and nuclear sites at Hinkley Point C and Sizewell C. So that's the generation side, if you like, ensuring that what we put into the EV car park of the future is indeed low carbon and sustainable. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose. In addition to generation, we're also investing in new energy infrastructure. This is to support the UK's shift to a cleaner, low emission transport future. And we've been in the EV ecosystem for well over 20 years. So indeed, we installed the first charge points in London in 1999. And we were behind powering the network, the charging network across the Olympics and Paralympic Games for London 2012. Our presence in the EV space includes tailored propositions for vehicles and chargers and tariffs across the residential and business segments. And we will continue to grow this organically. But we've also made key investments in EV capability. So last year, we acquired Pivot Power, the specialist in large-scale battery storage and power infrastructure for EV charging. And earlier this year, in February, we acquired a majority stake in PodPoint, one of the UK's leading providers of EV charging. Over 90,000 pod points installed and partnerships with major car manufacturers. So we're definitely building in that area. So if I quickly set the scene, because time is short, if we are to meet our net zero targets by 2050, we must act now to reduce our carbon emissions across all sectors. And EV is just one piece in the sustainability jigsaw puzzle. Whilst the energy sector has taken a dramatic turn towards greener generation over the last 2 decades, transport has not quite taken the same steps and is now our largest carbon emitter, responsible for over 1/3 of the UK's emissions. And I'm sure you've heard that more than once at this event. It's not just about carbon. Increased air pollution is also causing a public health crisis and is costing the UK in the region of 6 billion per year. So if we are to help Britain achieve net zero, we must tackle emissions from transport now. And that is why EDF are investing to help the UK transition towards electric vehicles. To this end, we welcome the ambition that the UK government has set itself for the EVs in the recent 10-point infrastructure plan. Indeed, ban on new ICE sales in 2030, a £1.3 billion fund to accelerate the rollout of charge point infrastructure, £592 million in grants to incentivize people to actually purchase the vehicles, zero emission or low emissions, and 500 million investment in the next 5 years for the development of mass-scale EV battery production. So in aggregate, quite a substantial level of investment. However, is the battle for electrification really won? Yes, the government has brought forward the ban on the sale of ICE vehicles. Yes, we're seeing businesses and consumers take initial steps towards electrification. Yes, we're seeing the supporting charging and network infrastructure now being developed. But can we truly say the battle is won? So I would say that the battle plan has definitely been drawn up. And indeed, we need to take more action, seize the initiative, and continue collaborating in the EV ecosystem where it makes sense, and indeed competing where we believe that drives a better outcome for customers, consumers, businesses, and our own net zero ambitions. So I think that's my time done. Thanks, and if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Philip, thank you so much for starting the sustainability panel off so well. So now it's time to take a question from the audience. All right, so the question is, how important is it for EDF that the percentage of renewable energy produced keeps pace with the increased demand for EVs?
So it's clearly important for EDF, and beyond being important for EDF, it's important for all of us and for the sustainability of our country and our planet. So what we fill EVs or what we power EVs with clearly has to be sustainable, or it defeats the purpose. Point I made. So clearly the development of renewables and zero carbon nuclear needs to keep pace with the increased demand that we'll be seeing over the years as EVs become more and more mainstream and indeed commonplace and the only way to travel, apart from a bit of hydrogen potentially, but that's not for today's discussion.
Well, thank you, Philip, for taking that question. Please do join us at the end of the panel to ask questions of your fellow panel speakers. Now I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Henrik Andersen, CEO of Vestas. As I'm sure many of you know, Vestas are the world's largest wind turbine company. Vestas also sponsors of Formula E, so they are already very deeply engaged with the e-mobility sector. So Henrik, welcome to the EV Summit.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And first of all, thanks for having me. And I think for me, it's a delight to present just short of why and how we are doing what we have as a company, and also in part of the journey we are on as everyone in the industry right now. I think to talk about a truly sustainable global energy system, that requires, first of all, building avenues also to deal with electrification. I think it's also looking at different technologies and also these pathways to grow. Because if we are truly addressing this, we will also look at electricity only right now accounts for somewhat around 20% of the global energy mix. And that means we will still have to decarbonize somewhere around 80%, and that heavily relies on how we are able to electrify that. I think what we see now from governments, we see it from both EU, we see it from around the world, of course, that are crucial to support that energy transition across the globe. But I also think here, industry leaders, it is a little bit of a reminder of that a lot of industry leaders, we tend to point in especially government and also EU direction, and then representing large workforce and large enterprises. I think some of it we also have to look, what are we doing in our own backyard first and foremost. Just a few observation information about Vestas. We have delivered in excess of 100 gigawatt of wind turbines globally, installed in more than 75 countries. That represents a sort of a displacement of 150 million tons of CO2 every year. That means also that equals to somewhere around removing more than 100 million cars from the street. And that is again addressing not only the CO2, but it also improves the quality of life and therefore also the better air pollution of that matter. But for Vestas, that's not enough. And I just wanted to here highlight that we have to be sustainable in everything we do. And that is also why when we sat down in 2019, we also looked at how is it then having probably the world's most sustainable products available, because if you look at one of the turbines in the background, that turbine will go carbon negative somewhere around 3-4 months after it's fully commissioned. And that just shows that then for the next 30 years, it will be there and be positive contributing to our green footprint. But we took the decision of also making that we wanted to be carbon neutral in 2030. And we got three steps in that journey. One is our transportation ourselves. Two, it's the steel that goes into the tower of the turbine. And three, it is how we actually address the energy consumption in our own manufacturing footprint and also our facilities. And I just want to share there that when we look at this, for us, it was very clear that we looked at ourselves. We have in excess of 5,000 cars. We have a relatively large group of employees that do technical services globally to our turbines. And at the same time, a number of us also have a Vestas benefit car. And when we look at those, we took the decision from 1st of January that if you have such a Vestas car, you would have to have either a hybrid or electric vehicle being at your sort of consumption and also your use when it comes from 1st of January. That means by 25, we will have replaced most of our 5,000 vehicles being in the portfolio of our vehicles today. And I just want to take that as an example of a lot of countries are right now complaining about, oh, how can we build the infrastructure? How can we do that? But part of that is that in all our offices and facilities, we will then be building charging stations where a number of places we will be using them only part throughout the 24 hours. And that means any other colleague or citizen in the country can then use the same charging stations, of course, swiping the charging key. And actually, just today, we announced a global partnership with an LX where we will build these charging stations out throughout the world. And we will work closely in trying to get that part of the infrastructure just representative around in the countries where we operate. I just want to highlight that because I think too often we talk about both the ESG and we talk about the renewable footprint as something that has to be set and governed by governments or politicians in and around. I think it is super important that we also, as large enterprises, show the good example and lean into that because we are a very important part of building the infrastructure together. So with that, thank you for letting me have a few minutes to explain what we are doing at Vestas.
Henrik, thank you so much for your say words on sustainability from Vestas' perspective. Now I'd like to take a question from our global audience. And that question is, you've committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. Does that goal need to be implemented across the sector and across the world? What's your thoughts on that?
I think for us, it has to be across whatever we do, and that means we have facilities and we have operations across 80 countries. So that is a total footprint of Vestas in 2030, and no trade-off by carbon certification and doing that. So it has to come from our own means.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that very interesting answer. Appreciate it. And please do join us at the end to ask questions to your fellow panelists. Now, I'd like to hand over the reins to Julia Poliskanova, Senior Director of Vehicles and Mobility at the hugely well-respected Brussels-based NGO, Transport and Environment. Julia, the digital floor is all yours for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Shelley. And thanks so much for having Transport and Environment at this great event. It's a shame, like many other people said today, that we can't meet in person, but we do hope that 2021 will be a different year and we'll collaborate better. So EVs and sustainability, a question that is a lot popping out in our media and is in our minds. Maybe I'll start by cheekily paraphrasing what Winston Churchill once said about democracy. It might not be the best, but battery electric technology is the best technology we have today to drive zero emissions transport system. We can't decarbonize our cars, trucks, or buses without batteries. And actually, to meet our long-term climate goals, we must have 100% sales of only zero emission or electric vehicles as soon as 2030. So we very much welcome the announcements from the UK shortly. And we certainly hope that next year, the European Union will follow suit and announce something for wider Europe as well. Are electric cars perfect? Absolutely not. What do we do? What do we need to do to make them fully sustainable all across the value chain? So I have 3 points that I've highlighted, which we as TNE see a lot popping up in the public debate to bring our evidence and analysis there. So first and foremost, to start with the long debated question around life cycle analysis, or the emissions across all fields, and whether or not electric cars are better or worse than petrol vehicles. I do have to say that I really think it's time to put that myth that electric cars are worse than diesel or petrol cars to rest. When we take petrol or diesel cars, we spend billions sending billions of euros or pounds to very questionable and undemocratic regimes to get oil, and then we burn it, choke in our cities and our environment. When we look at electric cars, once we have mined, for example, that cobalt or lithium, we can reuse it, recover it, and recycle it for many, many batteries. So it's absolutely not comparable. But if we go to data, we have recently looked at the most up-to-date analysis of the whole supply chain for both technologies, and we see that already today, an average electric car in Europe is 3 times better than an average petrol or diesel car. It's almost 3 times in the UK. It's actually almost 5 times in countries like France or Sweden, where the grid is more reliant on zero carbon and renewable sources. And actually the carbon debt from the battery is paid off in less than 2 years, apologies, of driving. So it's already better today. But there are hotspots and there are things we can improve. And so leading to my second point, which is around the power system or the grid. Already been discussed a lot during today, how important it is to go to 100% renewable energy system. That is important for the whole industrial ecosystem. It's not only batteries. Everything that is intensive and needs to produce, needs electricity or energy to be produced, needs to be from zero carbon sources. And batteries or electric vehicles are no exception there. It's important to actually see that battery electric cars can actually help our grids. If charged smartly, they can, for example, help us shift loads. They can help us actually integrate more renewables. For example, if we, in solar-rich countries, we charge during daytime, so we incentivize workplace charging, or in wind-rich countries, such as the UK, we charge at nighttime, so we incentivize home charging more. Therefore, in fact, battery electric vehicles is a battery on wheels, and in that respect it helps the grid. It's not a problem. And last but not least, I cannot finish before not talking about batteries themselves. We all know emotive pictures from Congo and places like that. And I think it's really important to underline that batteries are getting better with every year as we learn how to produce them more sustainably, as car makers and battery makers start to decarbonize as well as ask questions in their supply chains. There are a number of important things we need to do to ensure that batteries are as sustainable, as clean as possible. First of all, we must reduce further their carbon footprint. That simply means using renewables and zero carbon energy to mine, refine metals, as well as produce materials and parts of batteries such as cells or cathodes or precursors. It means making batteries circular, and there we especially need to make sure that we can repair, reuse and recycle batteries, including maybe less mature process today such as lithium. And last but not least, the whole supply chain needs to be fully responsible and ethical. And the good news is that just last week, the European Commission actually proposed the first ever global sustainable battery law. That means that any battery in Europe in the future, no matter where it is produced, will have to meet these 3 criteria that I just outlined. So batteries will only be cleaner and better in the future. We can do much more, and there's so much more in the supply chain that we can make cleaner and better and more zero emissions. But I just would like to stress that now is not the time to slow down or to question EVs. It's time to work together to make them even better than today, because they're our best chance to make our e-mobility and wider mobility system zero emission. Thank you. Thank you.
Julia, thank you for that powerful critical analysis. I'd like you to take a question from our global online audience. And the first question is, what needs to happen to dispel sustainability myths about electric vehicles in the public consciousness?
What an excellent question. Thank you. There's a number of things, and I think it's really important to understand that we all have a role and responsibility here. So first and foremost, we need to have much more transparent data. We just don't have data today. Some of the numbers that are used in media are from battery production in 2005. That has nothing to do with how batteries are produced today. So gathering transparent data and putting it in the public debate, and for public to actually know the data is really important. So it's very easy to expose those that have misleading information. I think there is also some role, I have to say, for the media, especially widely read media, when they publish misleading reports, which actually certainly are either have some interest that some industrial interest to actually rubbish batteries, for example, or they have data which is really not up to date. So there is a role for media to actually question and do some due diligence before it's published, because they do influence the public opinion of people. And of course, there's also a role for governments to actually put in place laws and regulations that will make batteries and wider supply chain more sustainable. It's not all perfect. There is much more we can do, for example, on recyclability side. So there's a role for everyone to be honest, but also to act and do better.
Well, thank you so much, Julia, for that thoughtful response. So please do join us again at the end for our final speaker. Our final speaker on our sustainability panel is John Safran, Deputy CEO at ALD Automotive. ALD are based in Paris. They're a global leader in the mobility solutions with leasing and fleet management services across 43 countries and with 1.7 million vehicles managed worldwide. John, very many thanks for speaking today at the EV Summit Sustainability Panel. The online stage is all yours.
Good afternoon, Shelley, and thank you again for the opportunity to join you here today. As you said, ALD is one of the largest mobility companies in the world, and we manage approximately 1.7 million vehicles across 43 different countries, providing corporates and private individuals with financing, servicing, and management of those cars. We also sell more than 300,000 used vehicles every year across those territories as they reach the end of their contracts. The EV revolution is here. So in the second quarter of 2020, the percentage of new registrations on our fleet reached 19% across Europe. And we have an ambition to be at least 30% by 2025. And at the heart of our new Move 2025 strategy, we have an ambition where we couple all our strategic actions called Move for Good, where we put people and CSR at the heart of everything we do. And a key pillar of how we can do that is by supporting the drive towards a more sustainable world, in supporting our corporate clients on the transition to electric vehicles. And as you heard from Henrik earlier, this is becoming a central plank of the strategy of most organizations today. We see our role as ensuring that our corporate clients have the information, the knowledge, the support and understanding of how to perform the transition in the most efficient manner, and also helping them overcome some of these traditional concerns regarding range, infrastructure and cost when it comes to electric vehicles and the adoption of them. We cover all areas of the transition. We have an ALD Electric program. We provide a holistic approach to helping the transition. We look with our clients at the vehicle choice that's available, at the infrastructure that's available to support charging, access to clean energy, as mentioned by Julian and the guys from EDF, which is key, an analysis of the data and the driver patterns so we can identify the most suitable drivers to make the transition immediately and then continue to move people over as the usage patterns become more aligned with the choice of vehicles available. And central to this is also the consideration of the total cost of ownership, which is beginning to equalize for corporates with the help of government incentives, but continues to pose a challenge for some of the corporates who would like to move faster. Now, we recognize we don't do this alone. We work with partners in this ecosystem, such as ChargePoint and Polestar that you've heard of today. And we also work with all the other OEM partners, including Tesla and utility providers, to try to bring this holistic offer into play for all of our clients. It's worth noticing we also see a key role in the way we retail used cars in democratizing access to electric vehicles as well. A lot of private individuals today struggle to get into an electric vehicle today because of the price of new vehicles. However, through used vehicles and used vehicle leasing, we're able to bring high quality electric vehicles that are 3 or 4 years old, but are fully serviced and fully maintained and come with various warranties and guarantees to make those cars available to people that are going to require them now and in the future. And particularly as we face an increase in bans into city centres where you will need an electric vehicle, we see a role that we can play in terms of making those, used electric vehicles more accessible to those private individuals. The last thing I just want to mention is in terms of that data insight that I talked about, we recently conducted a study in the UK where we monitored the driving behaviour of 10,000 company car drivers on our fleet over a period of 6 months pre-COVID. The aim was to review these real driving patterns, not theoretical numbers, of real company car drivers and understand how we could support them in making the transition quicker. This study shows us that 2/3 of these drivers cover more than 200 miles in a single day, on average less than 1 day per month. And what this means is that the transition for those drivers would be very easy to go into an electric vehicle with minimal disruption to their normal daily working patterns. And in fact, if you increase the limit to 250 miles per day, which is the average range of most of the new EVs coming to market now, the number rises to 80%. And what this allows us to do is provide real insight to our corporate clients that actually this transition is not as difficult as they believe. Now, it's very important that we provide the full range of services on the transition. We need to make sure the drivers are provided with charging infrastructure which enables them to drive fully charged vehicles. Otherwise, we end up in the situation that we've seen with PHEVs in recent times, that if you take a PHEV and you don't charge it on a regular basis, you're actually not only negating the positive impact, but you're actually worsening it in driving a heavier car and creating more pollution in the environment. So in conclusion, we're committed to supporting the transition. We recognize our responsibility in assisting our corporate clients in making this transition in an informed manner. And we remain fundamentally optimistic in the belief that in everything we do today, we can contribute to a more sustainable future tomorrow.
John, that was a hugely insightful talk. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. May I open up questions now to our audience? So the question that I have for you, John, is sustainability the primary concern of your customers who drive electric? And if not, what is?
We've seen a shift in corporate thinking in the last couple of years, and it is sustainability. Most corporates are now coming under increasing pressure from shareholders and stakeholders to become more sustainable in terms of how they carry out their business activities. And I also think there's a leadership culture emerging as well, where sustainability is right at the top of any corporate agenda. So a lot of people are looking to accelerate that transition, and we were very interested that even during the COVID period, it didn't slow down. The transition continued to accelerate, and there's a newfound momentum behind that transition coming out of the COVID period. I should add, however, Shelley, that most people that drive some of these EVs out there love them as well. So a lot of people, when they actually drive an EV and they enjoy the experience of driving an EV, never want to go back as well. So we're finding that once you put someone in an electric vehicle, they never want to come out of it again. And all of these worries seem to suddenly disintegrate because you get such a great ride from doing it.
Thank you so much for that, John. I totally agree. I've been driving electric for the past 5 years, and there's no way that you can put me back in a petrol car again. All right. So now let's welcome back our full panel to field questions to each other. Now, Philip, as our keynote, I'm going to invite you to kick things off and start the questions with our panel. So what would you like to ask and to whom?
Right. Well, first of all, can I say that it's absolutely awesome to be sat in a panel where you actually wholeheartedly agree with what everyone has to say. So nothing contentious here at all. I think if I could ask John a question really about his view on fleet managers, because clearly the transition to electric is where the fleet manager meets the energy manager in a corporation, and they kind of merge into one. are you hearing or seeing sort of any reservations or excitement from fleet managers regarding this new this new target for no ICE vehicles beyond 2030? Do they believe it can happen? What are you hearing in that space?
What we see from fleet managers, I think, number one, they do believe it can happen. Number two, they want to get there quicker. Number three, they then hit some arbitrage within the organization around the total cost of that transition, which is slowly equalizing. But today there is still an arbitrage, and we have to appreciate that. But we know that's narrowing with the help of government support and with the increased vehicle range that's being provided. And the last constraint is really about the delivery of the charging infrastructure, because everyone talks about the public charging infrastructure being critical in this game. But actually, we know that 80% of the charging takes place at home or at the office for most people. And as long as you can find a very slick solution for providing charging capabilities to someone at home or at the office, you can pretty much address most of their driving needs going forward. Obviously, in some of the urban areas, and I live in Wimbledon in London, and we park on the street, so it's not particularly easy in order to access charging infrastructure here. But we know with the help of people like yourself, it's going to change. And it's going to become more accessible going forward. And I think, as I said, there's a momentum there which is going to get us all there much quicker.
I do agree.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you to both of you for that question and that response. So Julia has a burning question that she'd like to pose to her fellow panelists.
Thanks, Shelley. In fact, my question has just been stolen, but I had a similar question to Julia. In our analysis, we really see that for companies today, it's a no-brainer to go electric on total cost of ownerships, on the models that are now on the market this year. Anyone who has a company car should really buy a battery electric vehicle as of 2020. So I just wondered, in your experience, why can't companies go faster? What can we do to actually make all these companies go faster? But I think it's very close to the question before, so I don't know if you have anything at all to add here.
Well, I think you touched on one point there, Julia, is this question around total cost of ownership. And I think it's often difficult sometimes to look at the real cost of the electric vehicle when you consider the upfront cost, which today is bigger, even with the help of some of the government subsidies. But we know it's equalizing, and there's a challenge there. So when companies initially look at a leasing rate, for example, they may see a difference in that leasing rate and recognize the arbitrage as being too much of a bridge today to make. However, when you look at the total life and you look at the cost of running that vehicle over a period of time, and we know that maintenance is less on the vehicle, and obviously the cost of the energy to run the vehicle is less, we can work by providing a full consulting solution for the clients to show them that that total cost of ownership is much narrower, or the gap is much narrower than we think. We can also work with partners in the ecosystem to try to narrow that cost further. So working with people like ChargePoint as one example to provide access to infrastructure for people at home or at the office, and try to make sure that we can support the implementation of charging infrastructures in offices as well. For sure, there's a big willingness. PHEV is a little bit of a bridging technology to get us there. If PHEV's used in the right way, and by the right way, I mean it's used in the right use case and fully electric charged for 95% of its journeys, it can help in terms of the transition in this period. But at some point, everyone will switch to full electric. And again, as I said, we see our role in trying to make sure they do that in an educated and informed way.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that response, John. Henry, I see you have a question.
Yeah, no, I'll just sort of say, I maybe provoke a little bit here, because I think we now come into this, we all agree, and this is about TCO, and we will get the facts to companies, and we will get the facts to the employees and other stuff. Listen, guys, I worked in the UK. I was based there in a very large enterprise between 2005 and 2012, and I actually got the ability to have a global company and get the car fleet under my leadership and other stuff. And as a guy at that point in time, probably being pretty naive and still in the early days of a global leadership role, of course you can take a very easy decision on a car fleet and just do what is right from a TCO point of view. But I think many people still have an emotional attachment to a vehicle, and where if you take your stats, John, driving 250 miles a day, I think you are about to spend almost as nearly, at least if you're in the UK, almost as much time and hours in the car as you are in the workplace. So I'm pretty sure that most people will fall for some of the TCO discussions. But I would just say, as a Vestas, as a global enterprise, which I've had here, when you have a town hall, you have a young generation. I always sort of categorize it a little bit more. Up to 35, everyone said when we did our policy, that was about time, almost a bit late, Henrik. Then you got the cluster between 35 and 50, where we get a little bit, oh yeah, well, yeah, if you say so, Henrik, I of course follow the company policy. And then about 50, dare I say, I'm in that, yeah, but you also know I really need my car, and this is also an important part of what I drive and how I choose it. Listen, guys, the emotional attachment from TCO facts towards also the emotional buy-in. And if I just go back, when we start looking at that, it was the slimmest alternative program I ever seen, second half of 19, John. But I think from 19, if you looked at it 12 months ago to today, you got a program that is probably quadrupled in just the number of models, the availability, the alternatives. And as you are rightly saying, Julia, the TCO and the facts are all supporting that. But I think it's a constant now also emotional sell-in, not just the TCO fact. And we are dealing with some of the same things also in renewable. And I'm pretty sure, Philip, from an EDF point of view, renewables, wind and solar were absolutely more, and they were depending on subsidies in 90% of the world markets 10 years ago. Today, in less than 5% of the global markets, you depend on subsidies. Else, fossil, nuclear, everything else is beaten by the renewable energy sources today. So I think the fact has changed so tremendously in just 5 to 8 years. And in EV vehicles and electric vehicles, just within the last 12 months. So fact updates has to get a lot better festered into the emotional buy-in as well.
I agree. If I can come back on that quickly and then hand the mic across to my co-panelists. Completely agree. And I think that buying a car, so what we see from EDF is that we're kind of at the our core product is electricity, right? The fuel that goes into these things. However, we are present on all through the value chain and the supply chain. Well, not necessarily the supply chain, but definitely the value chain. But customers that we talk to, if I bring a customer view, they want to talk about the car. So it's the car. Then once you have the car, they decide, right, how am I going to charge this? So they want to talk about charging infrastructure. And it's not until the very end that you think, right, what am I actually putting in this? First of all, you just want it to work. So you're not sometimes not looking at the grid mix going into it, but then you absolutely want to fill it with renewable and zero carbon electricity. And when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, of course, I'm going to say that that's dependable, safe nuclear. Yeah. And that's, that's a standpoint I come from, but I realize that not everybody shares the view. But in terms of the emotional purchase of a vehicle, I think that is slowly changing. The younger generations love EVs, but couldn't necessarily afford them because of this TCO question. The older generations don't like EVs because they have the emotional attachment to the older mode of transport. And yet EVs, I think, are doing pretty well, slowly changing that perception of being a good thing to do for the world, a great fun way to drive. And clearly, I think with all the new models and new designs, etc., they are now capturing that emotional purchase lever, I would say.
Maybe I can jump in here with a TD perspective. I very much agree. Car is a very emotional aspect. It's the second most valuable thing people buy after a house. However, who is better to actually sell your car if not a car maker themselves via their dealerships? And I really want to stress that this year, it's no surprise that this is the year of the electric car in Europe. It actually, on volume, we are on par with China this year, which is pretty impressive, because car makers have CO2 rules to meet this year. That's why we had investment. That's why we have the models that people want to buy. That all is largely driven by that. And then car makers almost, it's not, I mean, we can all convince people on the street, but I think car makers will do the best PR job, that the person will actually, instead of buying a diesel SUV, will hopefully buy an electric smaller car, or maybe still an electric SUV, but at least with no exhaust emissions. So I think there's also that momentum there. And once the car is there, and once the cars in 2025 or there around will actually reach price parity with petrol and diesel cars, then we will really be talking.
Yeah, Julia, I think
Excellent.
it's a great point. I mean, there's so many exciting models coming to market. I also, as I alluded to when I spoke, we recognize that bringing high quality used electric vehicles to the market in 22, 23, 24 will be key in supporting the transition as well, because it does make electric vehicles much more accessible to a wider audience. And what we try to do with some of our partners is offer more flexible terms on those financing products, so people can try the EV without worrying about being stuck with it forever. It's a little bit like the car sharing schemes. And as I said, people, once they try it, they want to stay in it, and they want to stay in it, and they want to use it, and they want to take another one. So often it's about, and coming back to Emmeric's point, if you can get people in that first cycle and get them into the EV for the first time, they will never come out of it, regardless of their age or regardless of what they do as well.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to close out our session and say that this is going to be 2021 is the year of the electric car. So we have to wrap up now, but I'm sure we could have carried on this conversation much, much longer. So I want to say thank you to our panelists, with special thanks to our sponsor, EDF, for supporting us, not just on this panel, but across all 3 years of the summit. That ongoing support is greatly and much appreciated. And thanks to the questions from our online audience, we pride ourselves on our interactivity, and the summit is nothing without our audience and our community. So as we come to the end of a supremely successful first day of this year's EV Summit, 2 days when the world's e-mobility leaders come together to set the direction for the sector, I would personally like to thank GreenTV for giving me the opportunity to speak on this opening afternoon. I've learned a great deal of knowledge in terms of just sharing my experience here today and gleaning what I've learned with my peers back across the Atlantic. So the summit will be back fully charged and with maximum torque tomorrow, when we'll bring you panels on international charging infrastructure, mainstreaming EVs, electric vans and trucks, two wheels, and research. So thank you for joining us today. And please do join us tomorrow for more actionable insights from the leading voices in e-mobility. Take care and have a great afternoon.